Welcome, welcome. Hey y'all, it's Ashley here from Love the Commotion. Happy Sunday to you. Today, let's talk sinners. So, one of the biggest questions that I get is, do you do free choice sinners or rotations? So, I really wanted to dive kind of deep into the differences between the two and the pros and cons of both, right? Because while I have my own opinion on this topic, of course, I think it's important to look at the pros and cons to everything you do in your classroom as to make like this educated decision based on your circumstances, right? Because let's be real, we're not all teaching in the same place, so everything looks different for everybody. So let's think about the pros and cons of both. So I kind of want to go through those today to better help you make a decision for your classroom. And then I'll kind of tell you where I land in my classroom with it. So free centers are generally defined as children are allowed to move from center to center where however they choose without limits, right? So we're not telling them where to go. We are not managing the ins and outs of that. They are just freely moving in around the classroom. Now, there may be some limitations as far as, not taking materials from center to center. There may be some limitations of how they use materials and, things like that. But in general, they're just moving from center to center. So, rotations generally, and there's of course some area between this, but generally running centers on rotation is managed by the teacher, and children are told to go to certain centers and then they rotate based on whatever time span the teacher sets, right? So it might be minutes that day, it might be days, right? The next day you go to a different center. It may be even a mixture of the two. Maybe you do rotation centers and then you do free choice centers later. Maybe you do rotation centers for a certain amount of time and then allow free choice. There's lots of gray area in there, but we're really going to dive deeper into the pros and cons of the absolute free choice and then more of the rotation of this is where you're going to go today. And, many of them have charts and things to keep track of where the children are going. So let's jump in with free choice centers and let's talk about the pros here. So obviously children make their own choices here because they're moving freely from one place to another. So they get to choose to interact with centers that interest them because they have that control piece over where they spend their time in play. So many times we see children going to what interests them the most and staying there for a big chunk of time. Because students get to choose the center that they go to, they're more engaged in the activity at that center because obviously they chose it and it's of interest to them. And so we find them to be pretty engaged in that center because that is what they are choosing to do. Students also decide who they want to interact with. So that's definitely a pro. They can, move themselves to different centers based on their friends or peers that are in there already. So they can go to a center for a specific peer, or they can or on the flip side, they can choose to leave a center if that peer is being disruptive, or maybe they just are, need some alone time. They can make their choice to remove themselves from that center as well. And then another pro is movement, right? They're generally moving their bodies more because they are moving from center to center. So like when their body does get restless in one place, they can stand up and they can move to a different center. And they may choose a center where they're standing up more, where they're not sitting down at a table. And so they can kind of self-regulate that themselves. That's what I found is one of the biggest drivers for them moving centers is, lack. One, they're done. They lack that engagement. And then two, it's like my body's ready to get up and move somewhere else. And that's something that they can do with that. So those are all great pros. Lots of student choice there. We're giving them lots of choices and they are doing a lot of their own regulation, right? Cons, though, would be that they're not going to every center, right? They may not choose centers that don't interest them and they may not even try them out. So it can be challenging to get them to want to go to those centers that they don't try on their own. And then one center might get overcrowded. So if there's no limiting of children in the centers, then one center can become overcrowded and we can maybe start having problems with the management of that center, maybe friends are starting to push each other or get angry because there's just not enough space for them. And so that's when maybe we have to step in with that. But that's a con as well, whereas since there is no limit, there's a possibility of it becoming overcrowded. So as you can see, there's this give and take, right? You're allowing a lot of choice, but you're also not necessarily knowing exactly what centers they're going to and how long they're spending there. So there's kind of that control piece from the teacher of knowing, I'm not sure you did anything today that maybe involved writing, right? At centers. But you can also choose to add in some things with small group and whole group where we're kind of bringing those things in. So we'll talk about that in a little bit at the end. But let's move on to center rotation. So the pros for here is all children are going to go to every center on a rotating basis because, they are being asked to go there. And so they're going to try out centers that maybe they wouldn't have tried out on their own, and they might find that they like them, right? Also, you're going to know that children get exposure to certain activities. You're going to know that they, you at least put this activity out. Of course, you can't make them use it appropriately, but you can have it there and you can know that you gave them exposure to certain skills because they did go to every center. You also get to control the amount of students that are in each center. So you can keep them from getting overcrowded, right? This is how many go here at a time. This is the number in a group or whatnot. And then you control which students work together. This could possibly help you deter some behavior issues that you maybe have seen in the past with certain students. And so you can kind of control who works together. So those are the pros. The cons are definitely that children aren't choosing the centers they go to, and they may become bored and unengaged because they didn't choose that and they're asked to stay there for a certain amount of time. They may lose that engagement but have nowhere to go until the time is up. Children may not get the opportunity to choose which peers they want to build relationships with during play. And play is generally when they build these relationships, and so they may not get that opportunity with center rotations. Children may try to switch centers, so there may be some management things going on. You may have to do a little bit more management as far as they may want to play with the different peers. They may try to go over with that peer, or maybe they tell you, oh, I'm done and I want to go somewhere else. I'm done with this material. And then they want to leave or go do something else. And so that's more management from the teacher's side. And they may start to dislike playtime because they don't have an ability to make choices based on their interest. And, obviously this doesn't happen with every single child, but there are some children who are pretty set on what they want to do with their time. And that might become an issue with them not wanting to go to certain centers because it doesn't pique their interest. And if rotation happens after a certain amount of time, you may want to think about the possibility of transition issues for students. Maybe they want more time at that center and you didn't allow enough in their mind, right, for them to get it done. Or the flip side, maybe they're ready to move on and they're bored and they're still having to stay there. So some more management type things to think about if that's what you're leaning towards is just to kind of how I want to handle those things when they may present themselves, because it's always better if we kind of have our minds wrapped around it first before it actually starts happening in our classroom. So as you can see, there really is pros and cons to both choices. There really are. You have a more peace of mind with the rotation side, that they are getting what you need them to get. And then on the free choice side, you really are allowing choice. You're allowing students to be themselves and choose what they're interested in and things like that. So, there definitely are pros and cons. For my class personally, I choose free play. There's many reasons for this, but mainly because of the restrictions and lack of choice. It pretty much goes against my philosophy of choice and allowing them to be engaged with something that they are interested in. But this also means that I have to work harder in some of those unpopular centers to make them more engaging so that students want to come to them, right? And so there's kind of that give and take, whereas rotations might take some more of my time in the management side. The free choice is definitely taking more of my energy and time into making centers a place that they want to go. But for me, we choose free play. I love the idea that they can kind of mix, mingle with their peers, leave when they are done with that peer, or maybe, want some of that alone time. I love the idea that they can basically self-regulate themselves as, oh, I'm done with this activity, my body's ready to move, I'm going to go over here. I like that they're doing those type of things. And I also like that it's just more joyful for their playing, right? They're choosing their own centers and they're choosing what they love, and so that's going to bring them joy. Again, pros and cons to both. There's definitely some sides of us having to get some things done and doing more management on one side or the other. It's always a give and take, right? But I am hoping this helped you kind of lay out in your head, okay, if I want to do rotations, what does that look like? And what are some things that maybe I should think about? If I want to do free play, what are some things that I'm going to, like, these are some obstacles that I may come into that children don't want to necessarily go to every center. How can I combat that? Things like that. I love to do small group. That's how I kind of balance the scales in my own mind of, okay, I know they still are going to practice some of these things. We're going to learn some of these things through whole group and small group. And so that's when I bring in my more teacher directed, but I also love the free choice so that they can learn intellectual skills and not just academic skills, because intellectual skills are the best way for children, or play, is the best way for children to learn those intellectual skills. We want them problem solving, right? We want them reasoning. We want them doing all these things, and they're doing it through play. And so that's my personal stance on it, but I really, really hope that this helped you kind of lay it out. And I always love for us to be prepared and really think through our choices in the classroom based on what's best for where we are and what we're doing and our own philosophy on children. So I'm hoping this can help you make the best decision for your classroom. So drop a comment, let me know, which do you do, and did this give you maybe a little bit of things to think about of some management pieces, maybe some thought shifts, things like that. I would love to hear it. I would love to discuss because I think it's interesting to see how other teachers do it, right? And how we all come from different backgrounds and we're all in different places, and we can definitely learn from each other. So drop a comment, let me know, how do you do centers? What works best for you? Have you found some of these roadblocks in your time with centers too? But love to hear from you. Always love to hear from you. So I will see y'all next week, and happy center time to y'all. Bye-bye.